Okay, enough of this high-level stuff. Let's get started actually writing real JavaScript code. And for this, Firebug, or perhaps the Google Chrome developer tools, are your friend. Firebug is a plugin for Firefox that you can get from getfirebug.com. And for a beginner, the main advantage of Firebug is it lets you interactively type in JavaScript commands and see what you get. Now, this is a tremendous boon. You don't have to write a JavaScript file and then compile it and then somehow deploy it to the server. You just type stuff in and see what you get. Even later, when we have advanced applications with jQuery, we will still use this approach. We will still, at that point, we will write some JavaScript code in files and load it. But we will still call those functions interactively when we're first learning. And this is a very, very useful thing. I'll give a demo of this momentarily. You can get more details on Firebug at their wiki page. Now, my daughter is a JavaScript developer for Google. And she keeps telling me that the Google Chrome development tools have caught up and, in her opinion, passed Firebug. Perhaps this is true. Most commercial JavaScript developers use either Firebug or the developer tools in Chrome. And both of them let you type in JavaScript commands interactively and see what you get. Now, they have much more advanced features for advanced programmers, but the main thing that it gives you for beginners is the ability to type in JavaScript programs, functions, or variables, or constructs directly and see what the output is. Now, surprisingly, even Microsoft is catching up in this regard. Microsoft has long been a laggard in JavaScript, but they've caught up dramatically with Microsoft Edge. And even the latest version of Microsoft Internet Explorer has decent JavaScript development and debugging tools. And I also want to comment that Microsoft Edge has a significantly faster JavaScript engine. So not only has Microsoft caught up in the developer tools, or not, I shouldn't say caught up, but catching up in the developer tools, but they're catching up in JavaScript performance as well. So the point of this is you want something that lets you type in JavaScript interactively for practice. Firebug is perhaps the most popular, but Google Chrome developer tools are close behind. And all major browsers, including the Microsoft browsers, have very strong support for JavaScript implementation. So once you've installed Firebug, here's a quick overview of the development process. I'll give you a demo in a second, but let me summarize first. First thing you want to do is make a very simple web page. And here's an example. You can just type this in a file yourself, or you can copy it from the website. And so I want to point out that all the code, every HTML example, every JavaScript example, every jQuery example of this entire video series, you can download from coreservlets.com. Just go to the main website, coreservlets.com, click on the JavaScript tutorial in the upper left, and then for each of the sections you can download the sample files. But this one is so simple you can probably just type it in yourself. The point here is it's a very simple web page with no interesting content in it. It's just an excuse to launch a browser. So you launch, in the case of Firebug, you launch the browser viewing this page. You click on the Firebug logo, or you hit F12, and then you go to the tab that says Console, and you start typing stuff in. And then the approach in Google Chrome is very similar. You bring up the web page, and then you go to the developer tools, and you click on the Console tab, and you start typing stuff in interactively. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Okay, I said that to try things out interactively, you should first make a very simple HTML page, and this was the page that I showed in the slides. Now, I'm using Eclipse as my editor for HTML and for JavaScript. The reason that I use Eclipse is that I'm also a Java programmer. And Eclipse is not only good at writing the front-end HTML and JavaScript code, it's also good at writing the back-end code, which in my case is Java. And this combination of front-end code in JavaScript and back-end code running on the server in some other language is very typical of real-life applications. Most, even moderately complex real-life applications consist of both pieces. A front-end piece using JavaScript, that's what you're learning now, and a back-end piece running Java or PHP or C# or Ruby or some other language like that. Now, in real-life applications, this is often divided across multiple developers. And so some people specialize in the front end in JavaScript. Some people specialize in the back end in Java or C# or Ruby or PHP or some other language. And there are people also that do both. For now, you're learning the front end. Don't worry about the back end. However, eventually later in this video series, we are going to need to run some back-end code. I'm just going to give you some back-end code that you can run. I'm not going to teach you how it works. That's a whole topic in itself. And at that point, which is lesson 10, we'll learn how to use Eclipse. And so if you know how to use Eclipse now, go ahead and use it. Often Java programmers, PHP programmers, or Ruby programmers use Eclipse. Typically .NET programmers use Visual Studio. But there are other IDEs that are popular, including NetBeans, including various different commercial tools that come from a company called JetBrains. But I would suggest don't learn any of those yet. If you happen to know one already because you were a PHP programmer or because you were a .NET programmer, fine, go ahead and use it. But if not, I would suggest wait and learn these slightly more complicated development environments until you need to run server-side code. And I'll show you how to download and configure and use Eclipse starting in lesson 10. So if you don't know how to use one of those IDEs now, which is probably the case, I would suggest for the first 9 lessons, just stick with a basic text editor. And there are lots of text editors that know about JavaScript. These include TextPad, TextMate, UltraEdit, Brief, BBEdit, Brackets, Emacs, VI, and probably a whole bunch of other ones. And so I would suggest use one of those. And if you don't even know about any of those and how to get them, don't even worry about that. You can just use Notepad. Now, a smarter text editor is a little bit better because it knows a little bit about JavaScript syntax. But even if you just use plain old Notepad, that's good enough for the first set of lessons. Okay, so I'm using Eclipse because that's the editor I use anyhow. You should use whatever editor you like and use anyhow. You don't need a fancy development environment yet, only when we get to lesson 10 and onward, when we need server-side code, and I will tell you how to use Eclipse at that time. I wrote an HTML file in Eclipse. Now I want to deploy it and try things out. Okay, I'm ready to practice, so I launch either Firefox with Firebug installed or Google Chrome, and then I go back to either my development environment or just the folder in my operating system that contains that simple page. I take that page and I drag it onto my browser. And what I see is boring. There's nothing interesting in the HTML file yet. The HTML file is just an excuse to launch either Firebug in the case of Firefox or the developer tools in the case of Google Chrome. And I'm using Firefox with Firebug, so I click on the Firebug icon, and Firebug comes up at the bottom of the HTML page. Now, eventually, that idea of having Firebug at the bottom, where you can kind of see part of the page and you can see Firebug at the same time, is good. That'll be valuable when we get to later sections, when we will use JavaScript and jQuery to search for things in the HTML page and modify things in the HTML page. It'll be nice that we can run a JavaScript command and see in the top half of the screen what we've changed. But right now, and for the first 9 lessons, we're just going to be practicing JavaScript itself. We're not going to be using it to manipulate HTML. So in that case, it's a little bit more convenient to have the Firebug window bigger. So if you go to the top right here and you click on the little icon that says Open Firebug in a new window, now Firebug comes up in a separate window, so you just have more screen real estate. And down at the bottom, you can type some JavaScript commands and see what you get. So for example, I can type 7 plus 8 semicolon, lines end with semicolons in JavaScript, and I can just hit the carriage return, enter, and up at the top I say, oh, 7 plus 8 is 15. Okay, and that's perfectly fine for really simple things, but very shortly we're going to be defining functions. And it's a little bit inconvenient to define a function all in one line. So it's usually better, most Firebug people, change Firebug so that it's multi-line. And so if you go up to the top right, and you click on the little arrow, Show Command Editor, now on the right-hand side, you can type some JavaScript stuff. And then rather than just hitting return, you click on the button run, because return just goes to the next line when you have multi-line input. And so I can say 7 minus 2. And then I click on run, and I see 7 minus 2 is 5. And this configuration, a lot of people use in real life. But some people, myself included, prefer to have the screen split vertically instead of horizontally. And so if you go to the Firebug icon over here, and then you go to Options, and you click Vertical Panels, now you have the JavaScript that you type in at the bottom and the results at the top. And I like that a little bit better. Okay, so the main point here is use Firebug or the Chrome Developer Tools for interactive practice. And this is valuable because there's just less overhead in writing real code. You don't have to write a JavaScript file and then an HTML file and then save them somehow, or maybe compile them and hook them together and have a cascading style sheet and deploy it to the server. You just launch an HTML page, click on the Firebug icon, maybe rearrange the windows if you want to, and practice. And this idea of interactive practice is not only valuable for beginners, it's valuable for experts also. Experts will probably load a file that defines some things, but they'll still practice this way before they deploy it. And so this interactive practice where you can see what happens and try things out is valuable for beginners, for intermediate, and even for advanced JavaScript programmers. And I highly recommend that every single time you practice something, which hopefully is at least at the end of every single lesson in this video series, you do this idea. Bring up Chrome tools or Firebug and try stuff out interactively. All right, so let me give a few examples of some things you can try out interactively. And I'm going to play around with some variables and with some functions. Don't be scared. We haven't explained variables or functions yet. We will shortly. So I'm kind of previewing some things we haven't talked about yet. I just want you to get the idea of this interactive practice. But again, don't be scared if you don't understand the exact syntax. We'll come back and revisit that later in this lesson. Okay, let me try a few things. Let me say var for a variable, x, and let's say that x is equal to 7. And most statements in JavaScript end with a semicolon. So this says, make a variable called x and give it the value 7. And then I click on run. And then you see something a little bit scary, undefined. Oh, did I do something wrong? Well, everything in JavaScript returns a value. But assigning to a variable for the first time doesn't have any specific value. So JavaScript just says undefined. It doesn't mean that x is undefined. It means that the whole line that I just typed in doesn't have a normal return value. It's undefined. But x itself is defined. It has a value. And we can try that by now just saying, what's the value of x? And we click on, type in x, we click on run, and it says, oh, the value is 7. And then I can say, well, what about x times 2? And sure enough, as you would expect, that's 14. But now the question is x still 7, or is x itself 14? Well, either one would kind of seem logical, so let's try it out. And we run it, and we see that x itself is still 7. So when we computed x times 2, it returned that value. It took the value of x7 and multiplied it times 2. It returned it. That's what you see in the next line, the return value. But it didn't change the value of x. If we want to change the value of x, we use the equals operator. So I'll say x equals x plus 3. The way to read this is take the old value of x, whatever it was, in this case 7, add 3 to it, and then assign that back, write that back into the variable called x. And it says 10. Let me try it. Is x still 10? Is x now 10? Yep, it is. So I assigned to the value, reassigned the value of x, and gave it a new value based on its old value. I can also just start over and say x equals 97. Okay, the value of x is now 97. All right, let me try some functions. Now, Functions are a little confusing. We'll come back and revisit them very shortly later in this lecture. But again, I'm mostly stressing the value of interactive practice, and I'm previewing some constructs that we haven't seen yet. But, especially if you've seen some other programming language, but even if you haven't, even from this just example without really explaining it very much, you can probably pick up the basics and try some simple function definitions on your own. So I'll say function square of x. This means I'm going to define a function, a reusable operation, that somebody's going to call later. And I named my function square. I give it a name that's meaningful to what it does. And when I put x in parentheses, that means when this function is called, when this operation is applied, somebody's going to supply a value. And I'm going to call that value that number x. And I'm going to say that what the function does is return, in other words, calculate and give back x times x. So that if you pass in 10, you get back 100. Okay, I run that, and it says, oh, undefined. And again, that doesn't mean the function itself, square, is undefined. It means the result of defining a function. That whole operation didn't have a regular return value. But the function I can now use. So I can say square of 5, and if I did everything right, I get back 25. Let me try another function. Function double of x, return x times 2. I run that. It just defines the function, and I say double of 5. Square of 5 was 25, but double of 5 is 10. Okay, so again, don't be too scared about variables, reassigning, functions, what are those little curly braces, what's this return statement. We'll cover all those things very shortly. What I want to get across now is the value of trying things out interactively. And I almost can't stress this strongly enough. You learn by doing, not by listening. Writing code is how you really learn. If you just want to, have some high-level knowledge of a programming language that you can mention to somebody, okay, just watch a video. But if you want to actually write code in real life, you got to practice. We'll have more complicated exercises later, but for now, just type in some simple things. And even when you do more complicated things, interactive practice first is the key. Type things in, see how they work, make sure you understand things before you try to deploy it to a real application.